Hi and welcome. This is Tina Persson from PhD Career Stories, and today we have an exciting guest, and his name is Bryan Lee, and he is from United States. Welcome, Bryan.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm super excited. But before we start to record here, I'm going to introduce you. So, Dr. Bryan Lee is a food scientist and consultant and author of the book with the name 150 Food Science Questions Answered. That's impressive, I must say that. And he earned his PhD during the pandemic. And that is what we're going to focus talking about a little bit here today. So he finished his PhD during the pandemic from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, United States. And today he is a consultant in the food industry and he works with a broad facet of organizations like Good Food Institute, TurtleTree, Block Sheep Food, and many, many more. And I'm quite sure that you will enter and collaborate with many, many more organizations, if I know you're right. Apart from that, he has an interest. He loves running. Yeah, he loves running. So, Bryan, what is the longest run you have done?
I've only hit the 12-mile mark, and I'm really hoping to push the next level, this year. So, but every day I'm a big fan of running.
Big fan of running. I can actually tell you that I was a running woman. I started running when I was 5 years old, and I was running with my dad. In where I come from in Copenhagen, we talk about kilometers. But my dad said he remembered my first run together with him, and we did 12 kilometers. And he said,
Wow! Oh my
yeah,
God, that's crazy.
that's crazy. And these small legs. And he said, yeah, I said, did I really manage? Well, you started to complain after eight, but then there was, some food, and then you got the energy back and you finished.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
So I was running until I was 45, and then I actually got some problems. So I started with indoor biking and a little bit more CrossFit. So I understand your passion.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
understand your passion.
I hope I can keep going, but yeah, my knees are starting to give me some trouble, so may have to switch someday. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, we come back to that because I know you have been doing a lot of walking as well. But you know, you have an amazing story, and that is, as I said in the beginning, you earned your PhD when it was pandemic times. And I
Mhm.
know from listeners, and I learned from many of my clients that they were super scared and said, "I'm going to finish my PhD during the pandemic," and how it's going to be with the job. And I couldn't even, I was sitting alone in my room, finish things, and I had to work from Zoom. It's really odd way of graduating. They basically said, the first one ever that did that. And I would take a look at you, because you are very successful now. So if you look back on, from today and go back, would you say, was it a perfect timing? Was it actually good what happened? If you look from both the positive and negative side of it, what would you say?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do look back and I think, wow, I actually had really good fortune. I mean, obviously the pandemic was a horrible situation,
Mm.
but making lemonade out of lemons, basically, it lit a fire. It created desperation in me because I had such a hard time looking for a job. I was struggling after graduating, and at some point, my wife and I even moved back with our parents. And you're in your 30s and you're married, and now you're living your parents again. It gives you a sense of it humbles you, right? That for
Yeah.
sure. But like I said, it lights a fire under you. And in that moment, I said to myself, like, I will never be in a situation again where I am going to be dependent on one single source of income. And so I worked very hard to find clients. I did everything and anything, and I think that kind of mindset allowed me to make a lot of mistakes, but also learn quite a bit in a very short period of time. And I would cold email CEOs, founders, startup companies, whatever it was, And after 100 emails, I landed one client that gave me the boost, the 1 year long project that allowed me to build my business. And that to me was, I earned that, right? Like, and I don't think I could have done that any other way. So I do think it was perfect timing. And it created an environment where it made remote consulting actually a viable business option.
Yeah, it actually did. This is a little bit as I see it. I look on my own business. I remember I was traveling 250 days a year, and then overnight it was like, okay, where do I find the Zoom, or how can I do? And suddenly I had a new business model, and this is the reason why I'm sitting, talking with you, and it's the reason I give workshops in the United States. I wouldn't have been forced to do that without the pandemic. It sort of kicked me out of my comfort zone. So,
Mhm.
but listening to you, your comfort zone here, you're a scientist, chemist, and then you start to do sales. You did a
That's
cold calling and all that. Tell me, how was that? And how did you kick yourself into that? Was that something natural or what happened?
I have to admit that, as a scientist, I'm less of a scientist than I am a bit of a business kind of guy, because it's not that, I started businesses when I was younger, but more like I was always intrigued and I was always interested. I was always learning, right?
Mm,
I'd read books about sales, about management, and not for any particular reason, except I thought maybe one day this would be useful. Um, and so I've always had very varied interests, outside of academia and outside of the work that I did as a researcher. Um, so I would say I was really poised to be in that situation where I could actually use the skill sets I developed. For example, in college, I used to take these classes, and they would ask me to basically talk to strangers.
mm,
For any particular reason. There was a lot of you know maybe you're doing a survey, or maybe you're trying to figure out, like, you know do how do women think versus men think, these sort of questions that gets you kind of engaged, and needing to talk to others. And it was just fascinating because for me, as someone that previously spent a lot of time in a lab, it did push me out of my comfort zone, and I'm so glad that I did those things, because now that I was older, it didn't seem so arduous,
no,
to
no.
just be, and then there's a lot of situations where I feel like you learn from just talking to regular folks on the bus, going to the cafeteria and talking to someone at a restaurant, someone that's outside your field, outside your you know the situations that you're usually comfortable with.
Yeah, but now I'm really curious because you say you like all these things, and what I learn here on the screen in front of me, you're an outgoing guy, Why chemistry from the beginning then?
That's really, yeah, that's an interesting. You know, I wasn't an outgoing guy when I was in high school, so I'd spend a lot of time in my garage, and I think I at some point I decided, I'll just build like a garage lab, because I was so fascinated by fireworks. Actually, that was the real thing that got me very interested. I loved the idea of being able to create colors, and wowing people. There was like this idea that, I can do something with chemicals that makes people excited and happy. And I
Mm,
think that to me was my primary motivation in chemistry, was, can I connect with people, right? And I think that's a thread in my life that somehow got me into food science. But it was originally this idea of, there's a lot of fascinating things, and I love doing magic tricks, actually. So
ah,
I
yeah, the wizard.
in my yeah, I would do, in my family gatherings,
Yeah.
I would be the guy that, I'd bring different compounds, I'd mix them together and create different colors, or change the flavor of something. It was, to me, that was a blast to be able to connect with people that way.
So you studied chemistry. So what pushed you to do a PhD? What kind of interest and passion, or was it an accident, or was it deliberately a choice to pursue a PhD?
Yeah, what happened was, after I graduated, with my chemistry degree as
Yeah.
a bachelor, I wasn't sure what I was gonna do next. And at the time, my father had passed away in my junior year, and I was trying to kind of figure out like what was I gonna do next, because I didn't love the idea of using chemistry to, develop petroleum
Mm,
products
mm,
or create pharmaceuticals. That wasn't really why I got into it in the first place, but that seemed to be kind of the pathway that I was approaching. So I decided to walk across the country. So I walked from California to Louisiana in the
yeah.
United States, and that's about 2,000 miles. And I,
Wow.
I have to convert it into kilometers.
Yeah, you have to convert it for,
I'm
remember
like
for about
maybe
European
yeah, yeah,
listeners.
yeah. I think maybe 2,800 kilometers. I
28, yeah,
Yeah,
2,800 kilometers.
I think so. So that was yeah, and I spent 6 months doing that. And that talk about pushing myself out of my comfort zone.
Mm,
I was spending a lot of time in the laboratory and doing schooling and that sort of thing. And here I was, basically relying on strangers and people to survive because I was, all I spent every day walking maybe 20 or 30 miles. Again, probably 40 kilometers about. And yeah, and then people would always were so helpful, and I really touched on this idea of connecting with people through food because
mm,
people would invite me over for dinners. People would stop by and we'd have a meal, or they would give me food. And it was an incredible experience because it really solidified this idea of like, wow, food is so critical. And
mm,
I was burning up like 3,000 calories a day, and I was always eating. So it just that became my world, and I
mm,
tried to figure out what can I do with what I have, my background in chemistry, and translate that into something
mm.
that connects with food. And I didn't know about food science. I never heard of it. Right. And then I somehow stumbled on a Journal of Food Science or Food
Yeah.
Technology. And I read, this article about how flavors interact with, the brain and, the importance of flavors. And then I saw that it was mostly organic chemistry. So I was like,
Yeah, it
oh,
is. It is. Yeah.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so that was the connection point. I was like, wow, okay, maybe I should really further my studies on this. And so I found programs in food science. And it was a little out of my depth. I'm very used to like very straightforward synthesis, right? Like from step one to step two, and so on and so forth. And food science is not like that. It's a lot of things and a lot of different things, and microbiology and engineering and that sort of. But I was passionate enough to realize like this was my path, and it was very important for me to make this transition,
Mm,
no matter how difficult it was. And I'm glad I did.
mm. So, if you now listen to your chemistry and then walk the talk, basically, you did here in between, and then studying food chemistry, which is indeed very different from traditional chemistry, but you have a very good basis if from your master here. But what would you say if you look back here now? What skills? If you say three important human skills you have that
Hmm.
has been essential for you to be where you are today, which three human
Absolutely.
skills would you then acknowledge?
Yeah, I would say number one is following curiosity.
Yeah.
I I'm very curious. My wife says I have a short attention span, and which for a long time I felt was could be a liability, but I've actually used that to my advantage because if I get very curious about things,
Mm,
and then I dig a little deeper, and then I really hit this point where I'm saying, oh, like this is actually really fascinating and I can
mm,
really connect it to my passions, then I can move forward very quickly. Versus if I'm doing I realized this long ago that if I was doing something just, because I had some, monetary goal, or if I was doing something solely for, um, you know, I don't know, impressing others, I couldn't do it.
mm,
I had to lead by curiosity,
mm,
for my own sake, and just for my own personal fulfillment. And I'm so glad I did because, I made these odd twists and turns in my career, I look back and it makes sense, right? I can make sense retroactively, but at the time, it people would wonder like, what are you doing? Why are you
mm,
doing this? And I said, because I'm curious.
mm, mm,
So that's number one. And then number two, I would say being willing to be uncomfortable. As we're talking about this, I think
mm,
a lot of the amazing things that we can do as human beings comes from kind of not to me it's not so much about blowing past your discomfort but actually just being right at the edge of your discomfort and constantly pushing a little bit and a little bit. I used to be someone that was very gung-ho and very determined and would just do things like and be so single-minded, but I realized over time that it was the situations where I said, oh, I'm actually a little uncomfortable. Let me just stay here for a little bit. And the
mm,
longer I stayed in my discomfort and the more I could tolerate it, the more I would develop these skills that ended up becoming very, very powerful for me
mm.
in the long run. The one example I want to include in this is writing.
Yeah.
I was a terrible writer in high school. I college, I never even touched it. I took maybe one or two writing classes, and I had an awful time. But I realized, right? It's funny because now I published a book, but
Yeah,
um,
you wrote a book. I think we need to come back to that one. And I need to interrupt you here, Brian, because
yes,
you
yes,
have a woman in front of you. I hate writing, and I left academia because of that. And then I wrote that book, and I'm writing every day because I have to write a lot on web pages,
right,
email. And I thought,
right.
I left academia because I don't like to write, and I'm sitting here writing. But I'm so
Oh,
happy for ChatGPT and Grammarly. You don't know, because I think it's a lot has to be with that I had some sort of pressure of writing perfect. So I was
mm,
blocked, sort of. But I prefer to talk. It's obvious. Uh, but I completely understand that. You do something and then you don't like it, and then people say, "Oh God, you're really good writer." Yeah, right. Maybe you should write for this journal here. And so, no, no, it starts again.
you're like I'm gonna back out of that opportunity. I've been there. Oh, that's so true. That's
Yeah.
so true. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's so funny because like you, I I felt like I probably couldn't have made it through my PhD unless would I wrote for fun only because it was the only way for me to do things in my seat and
Mm,
volunteer because I found like all these blogs to write for. But that was the only reason that would get me out of writing. I hated writing for my programs. Like it was just an awful experience. And I think that kind of leads to the third aspect
mm,
is I think having a way to communicate with people. I think whether it is through writing, whether it is through talking, whether it's
mm,
through um, any sort of format. I think communication is so key at the end of the day, regardless of what you do or end up
mm,
doing, because it really doesn't matter what you're up to unless you can convey the importance of it to someone
mm,
else.
mm.
And maybe not even the importance. Maybe it's just for fun or for the sake of it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
I think,
Mm,
yeah, I think thinking about relationships and how that works, where you're able to connect with another person through words or through talking, it's incredible. I think that's the most powerful thing you can do for yourself is having that
mm.
ability and developing it. Because, like I said, I was an introvert. I didn't have these abilities, coming out of the womb, right?
I have a
But
hard time to see you as an introvert at the moment. You're really outspoken. But on the other hand, I know introverted people can train this. So I think it's really
mm,
here to share with our listeners now that we are listening here to Brian, who has faced things in his life that he didn't like or he considered himself not being very good at, or even maybe drained you with energy, like writing and communicating. So you have trained yourself to do these things. And I like
mhm.
to come back to that because, you say you don't like writing, and then you wrote this book, and I need to go. I go back here in my paper 150 food science questions answered. How did you come up with that idea?
It was actually, so it's funny because like I mentioned, I was writing for this blog. It was through a professional society in food technology, and I got so into writing at one point that I was just putting out all these viral article pieces, and a publisher found one, and they found my name, and they just reached out to me and said, "We have this idea for you. Would you like to write this book?" So it wasn't even fully my idea, but it was a publisher had the concept and wanted someone to put it together.
Yeah.
So I think it was just happenstance in a lot of ways where and of course I worked with them and I created new sets of questions and ideas and answers, but ultimately it was like the right time for everything. And this happened actually shortly before the pandemic. So I think a lot of interesting things happened in that year.
There is a lot of stuff going on here in your life at the same time. People found you. So let's say here, people say that some people have luck in their career.
Right.
Would you consider that you have been lucky, or is it because you have been open-minded and working hard? What would you
Yeah,
what would you say?
I think I've been very open minded because
Mm.
I can tell you back then at the moment before everything kind of came together, I did not feel lucky. There was a lot of situations where I was like, wow, I might even leave this program just because just things weren't working out the way I was hoping. And so I think instead of those moments where I said, "Oh, this is hard. I can't do this. This is not working out. I'm not successful right now." In those moments, I said to myself, "Let me try something different." Right? I think that was the key. I said, because I was really it was my second year of my PhD, and I felt this slump, as I think most people do. I didn't feel like I was getting anywhere, and I said to myself, "Let me go find volunteer opportunity." And that's how I got connected to this blog that I'd been writing for 3 years, right?
Mm.
So it was not anything that I calculated, or I wasn't thinking, oh well, if I really write for this blog for 3 years, I'm
Then
gonna
I'm
write a
going to be
book.
famous. I'm going to be famous.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, it wasn't anything like that. It was just I was interested, I was curious, and I really loved it. And then I ended up running the blog myself, and then I
yeah.
was able to see the metrics, and I was able to, do the website design, and it just became this big thing. But it all started with this sort of little seed of maybe I'll give it a try.
Maybe
And
give it a try. Yeah. And it sounds like the podcast you're in, PhD Career Stories, it started with me and one of my clients. And now I would say there's over 25 people that have been working for me in the podcast. And now I have a team of 8 people here working. So, and suddenly people are contacting us. Oh, I like to be on your show. And it's like, when did that happen? Actually, it's not so that we planned it, because we thought it's
right,
going to be 1 year, but now it's actually 6 years and soon 7 years, so it's sometimes things just evolve. So if you think about what you experienced with your blog, and we can take PhD career stories here now, I would say that sometimes we just have to do things that we believe in, because we don't know what's going to happen in 3, 4, 5 years. We
right.
really don't know. And I would like to hear from your perspective. I said it on one of my Instagram accounts here, that going back to that, you actually start doing things, Bryan. And we maybe don't know what the future will come. We know that artificial intelligence will change a lot. We will maybe go into singularity here. We know that roughly 375 million people will or may change their jobs in the next 2, 3 years. So, with that perspective, I'd like to hear from you with that perspective, and also with the perspective that many jobs going to disappear, but many more going to, come on the market that we still don't know exist. Having in mind what you have done in your career with the blog and the book, and the walking inside, what kind of advice would you give to our listeners that are sitting shaking, like, how can I orient myself? What,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, what advice would you give them from
You
your
know,
own,
I
from your own learnings?
For sure, for sure. I think in the last, this has really solidified for me in the last couple of years. It took me a while to kind of arrive at this mindset, which is the question of how am I offering value, right?
Mm,
How am I how and you know that's separate from your personal life, your personal relationships. We're not talking about that, but in sort of the commercial aspect, the market aspect, how do I provide value? And I think there's a lot of ways that can show up, and I think at different times it can show up in different ways. But if you can somehow connect to this idea that you have something to offer, right? And maybe it's not now, maybe it's later, but you have something you can offer, and someone needs it, someone needs it desperately. And maybe that's so that they can move their company forward. Maybe they're trying to develop a new product. But at the end of the day, they're also trying to, offer value to the world. You want to connect to that. You want to connect to that stream of where do I fit in, where my skills, my way of being, my history um, will offer something more to this person where they feel almost called to give you money for, right? And it can be a little abstract sometimes, but I've always had to come back to this because anytime I think in terms of, well, this is the product that I'm going to offer. This is like when I think too much on the things
mm,
and the activity, I lose sight of the idea of like, am I actually having a relationship with this person where
mm,
they feel like my contribution is increasing, their opportunity to make more wealth, more abundance, so on and so forth. I think being able to connect with that has been so powerful for me
mm,
because every time I get lost or I feel this is routine, if I can come back to that, maybe that means shifting what I'm offering. Maybe
mm,
that means finding a new skill set, or maybe it just means finding the right person that's willing to, that appreciates what I'm offering. That has changed and shifted my business over and over again, and that allowed me to, instead of constantly working harder and harder and harder,
mm,
I've able to just do what I'm very good at,
mm,
um, develop those skills, and then connect with people who see the value of that skill set and are willing to offer more for that.
mm,
And that can be in a lot of different scenarios. It doesn't necessarily need to be in a freelance or consulting position. It could be, job offers and so on and so forth. But it's thinking outside of necessarily I'm this person, I have this PhD, and I have these skills. It's willing to take what you know and then finding ways to connect that with value, because that might mean changing the skills that you have, or it might mean just finding different ways to
mm.
to to deliver it. So that to me has been a huge lesson.
Mm. I think you are mentioning a lot of very important skills here. You say that instead of just working hard, focus on technology, performance, taking an intra perspective, outer perspective, sort of outreach, we talk about human skills basically, and also understanding the value. What are people interested in me, and what is the value I can bring to them? Then opportunities somehow come when you have a broader perspective of what you're doing, but you maybe don't see the end goal always. You have more of a sort of a feeling in your stomach that, oh, it's nice to do it, and there might be an interest in it, and you sort of know that. So that's very, very beautiful and nicely explained here, Bryan. Thank you a lot for sharing that. So really listen to Bryan here. Human skills and value-based thinking is super important in the future. I have one question here for you, Bryan. I know some of the listeners already are very curious, I guess, that I didn't jump on that question because you said you were introvert and you for sure gave a very extroverted impression here. So, how did you challenge yourself from your introverted you to going to be more reaching out to people? And I wouldn't say you have to be extroverted, but you give an extroverted impression. What did you do to sort of change your behavior here? Or
Yeah, it's a little embarrassing to say, but I might as well be open about it. But basically, I really wanted a girlfriend in college,
You want to be, yeah.
and I took a very um, maybe not scientific approach, but very cognitive approach, so to speak. And I studied actually like what are the behaviors that people who are in relationships tend to have. And I read a lot of books about psychology, and I think I was just so I think what it is you experience a pain point, right? You experience this pain. For me, my pain point was I felt lonely, right?
Yeah.
And I knew that my way of being was not getting me what I wanted. So I took a very large chunk of my time and experience and energy, and I just focused on what can I do to, find someone to love, basically. And it was just, I got into this whole set of experiences, and then I really pushed myself to go to festivals, to go to parties, and and talk to people, and it was there's a lot of course, a lot of mistakes made, but that to me was the biggest driver. I would say that turned me from this person that was very quiet, wasn't willing to talk very much, had a hard time, just being in a group of people, to someone that I look at myself nowadays and I think I don't even know how that transformation happened. And I think that can be something very interesting to think about, which is
Mm.
if there's something that is painful enough, and then you'll find a way. And I think that's sort of the thread that I experienced was the pain point of not being in a relationship, the pain point of not having a purpose or direction, and then the pain point of not having a source of income. Those were like very specific moments in
Yeah.
time where I was able to say, I got to move to the next level
Yeah,
of
you
me.
have. You have really. You when you get kicked, both feeling lonely, out of money, then you step out of your comfort zone completely here. But I can also, I would express it, maybe not pain point. I would say when your dream is big enough, you change.
Yes, yes, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. The
when you have
desire,
a
yes,
dream
no,
desire, your dream is big enough,
right,
then you're
yes,
gonna do things that are uncomfortable and outside of the box completely, because
hmm
your dream is
hmm
so big, so you can't stop. You're lying in the bed and you see all the pictures, and you have to do it somehow. Yeah, wonderful.
yeah.
Thank you for sharing, Brian. That was very, very, very lovely of you. I love to hear that. And indeed, I have a very hard time when I'm speaking with to see you as a shy, introverted guy. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I wish I could take a snapshot of myself, back when I was a kid, just so that I can prove that it's possible. I
It's
didn't come
possible.
out
You
this
didn't
way.
come out this way. I believe you. I believe you, Brian. And do you know what? We are coming to the end here, dear listeners. Thank you, Brian. It's been absolutely lovely talking with you and sharing all your experiences and your career journey, and your successful way of transforming under circumstances. I would say that I know many of our followers also share with you, and that you have done this fantastic road trip of going from the chemistry to food chemistry and being so inspired. So you even become an author, and then also moving into business, and getting clients in this persistent way that you have been working. Congratulations, Brian. Fantastic story. And I'm extremely happy to have had you here on PhD Career Stories as a guest.
Yes, thank you so much, Tina. It's been a pleasure to share my story, and I appreciate being able to hopefully, lead people along the way. That it's possible as long as you got to try. You got to try something
Mm.
at the end of the day.
Yes, you have to try. Never give up. Never give up. So, with that said, dear listeners, this is Tina Persson from PhD Career Stories, and we have over 100 podcasts and new podcasts coming up here 2023. And don't forget to write to us if you like to share your story, or if you know someone that you would like to share, you like them to share their story in our channel. You also find us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and we have a wonderful webpage on phdcareerstories.com. So thank you a lot from Tina, Copenhagen Metropolitan, to all of you. See you in a month or two. Bye bye.